Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Parenting is Easy podcast, where we will discuss the pleasures and the frustrations, the good and the bad, and the rewarding and the troubling aspects of parenting. I am your host, Hananya Abraham, and I'm a psychotherapist that specializes in working with teenagers, young adults, and parents with a specific niche in assisting with communication within the family dynamics. While everyone has their own unique journey and experiences as a parent and as a child, there are many common affiliations and attributes that we can all relate to and share. Together, we will learn from personal stories and experiences from parents across many different backgrounds, cultures, and communities. So get comfortable, grab your glass of coffee, and let's get right into the interview. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy, said no one ever. I am your host, Hananya Abraham, and I have an awesome guest today, a friend, and I guess to say in some ways a mentor as well, just for what she's taught me over the past couple of months that we've gotten to know each other. Talene Stephens, thank you so much for joining us today. This is really, considering from where you're located and the time zone and just how dark it is, it's really, really awesome that you're able to join us in this type of setting right now. But just a little bit about Taleen before we get started over here. She is a educator with over 15 years of education experience in both the classroom setting as well as collaborative work with homeschool families. She is currently a reading specialist and an ELA coach, where she works with individualized learning experiences for both students and teachers. Her expertise lies in blending traditional educational methods with innovative approaches, particularly through the lens of project-based learning, which I'm so curious to hear more about. And she's also the podcaster of The Learning Curve, Education Conversations, which hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about as well. Taleen, thank you so much for joining us today. Pleasure. So that's really where we got connected regarding the podcast, and hopefully we'll get to that a little bit later. But just hearing about what ELA coach is and reading specialist, I'm curious just for both for me and for the listeners here, if you could just talk about what those things actually are and how that's something that I guess us parents and maybe teachers as well can learn from.
ELA instructional coach and reading specialist. So this means that my job is, and lately it's been mostly just instructional coaching. So my main goal this year has been working with classroom teachers and how to effectively do ELA instruction in their classroom, reading and writing skills with their kiddos and things like that. And it's interesting because the school that I work at is an open concept school. It has no walls and doors between the classrooms. So if we have 3 fourth grade classes, all 75 kids can kind of see each other, and we call them facilitators and not teachers. They can kind of see each other, and the goal is to have them collaborate. And it's also a project-based school, so it's a little bit different than your traditional setup. And so what we do is we sit down with these teachers each week. We help them lesson plan. We help them problem solve. And then we also help them really hone in on their kids' individual needs as opposed to just whatever the standards are telling us to do. We do, of course, keep that in mind. But if a kiddo is struggling with reading, then we have to teach them how to dial it back. If they're struggling with writing skills, we teach them how to individualize their lessons and to make it more kid-friendly, hands-on. And if they're in the 4th or 5th grade and haven't gotten their primary reading skills down, we need to address those things, and we need to address it in a slightly less traditional way because the traditional way had not worked up to that point. And so we are kind of diagnosing and then helping the kids with their reading skills and things like that, and their writing skills.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot there I want to unpack. I want to go back to what you started with, this being a non-traditional classroom.
Yeah.
Can you explain what this concept is, and let's say for parents that are looking for more information on how to find a school like this, so that they can see if this is something that is good for them and their child? Curious what where people can go for something like this.
Yeah, I think there are little pockets here and there. Ours happens to be a public charter school in California, so it's tuition free, and people can apply by lottery to join the school, and it is very random, honestly, as far as who gets in and who doesn't get in and things like that. Um, it has its pros and cons, and it definitely isn't for everybody. It is kind of a louder environment because we are encouraging the kids to like collaborate with each other. The idea is for it to look like if you were to walk into our classroom or onto our campus, it kind of looks like mini Google. Like there's these steps that kids can sit on that have outlets on it, and they will sit and just have their computers plugged in, and they could be working on the auditorium steps, or they could be amphitheater steps, and then or they're in the classroom and they might be like on the floor on a cushion reading a book, as opposed to sitting at a table just like this and everybody's doing the same thing, right? And so it's interesting because the benefit of it when done properly is when those, let's use the fourth grade example again, when those facilitators all collaborate with each other really well, what they can do is mix and match their kids and homogenize them sometimes to better instruct the kids in their grade level. So if you have a group of kids who are reading behind grade level, you can kind of chunk them together and put them in one room, and then that facilitator can kind of tailor his or her lessons to what they need, and then if you have, and on the flip side, if you have kids that need more of a challenge, you can group them together, put them with the other facilitator, and so they kind of swap classes sometimes, and they are getting this education that's individualized for them. But the biggest thing here is that the adults involved need to be really good at collaborating. And so
yes.
That is the ideal, and it doesn't always work out like the ideal, and
Understood.
So you have to kind of follow your gut. And so anybody who is interested in a school like that, I highly encourage them to, take a tour before they make a decision and just see if that's the right kind of fit for their kid, because it does sound louder. So if that's a lot of input for them, that's probably not the place for them. If they thrive on a little bit more structure, there is structure, but if it's more, you have to just know your kid and to know whether a setting like that is going to work for them or if it's going to just stress them out, And
so can you talk about like what a ELA therapist is, and what is it that you're that you bring to the classroom? And I'm curious what parents can know more about from us reading specialists regarding what we can do at home.
Oh yeah. So for reading specialist stuff, that was a specific credential I got during my master's program, and it's basically just analyzing a kiddo's wherever they are in the spectrum of reading and in that process, and how to use their strengths to build upon their needs. And so my job is typically working with the kids who are struggling with reading a little bit to try to catch them up. And then the ways that we do this is, in my opinion, it starts when they're born. You have to read to them literally daily. I mean, even from the womb, like you're in the hospital, you gave birth, start reading. And I know it seems silly, but that verbal input and that connection that you make with your kids whenever you're reading with them is a huge, huge benefit for them in the long run. And it's not just academic, it is social emotional as well. And then what you can do is teach letter sounds first, not letter names. That's a big deal too, because I can tell you, kids will, or parents will say that their kids know the ABCs, right? And you're like, well, that's great. Except when I'm reading a word, I'm not saying that that letter is B. I'm saying that that letter says B, right? And you want them to know those letter sounds and how they interact and relate with each other. And so we start with kind of a phonics-based approach where, and the big term nowadays is science of reading, and that's how they break down basically it's the phonics-based approach. And there's always been this pendulum in education, which I could talk about there too. But starting with the basics to know that their foundational skills are there, while simultaneously reading to them, and like dragging your finger under the words while you're reading to them is really, really helpful. And just looking at the pictures and analyzing the pictures together is a big deal too. And then once they get the idea of phonics down, you want them to decode the words, which allows them to read, but you also want them to encode the words, which allows them to write and, break down a word. And invented spelling, like whenever you see silly spellings that kids make and stuff, I'm sure you've seen posts or you've seen your own kids do it too. It's great.
I'm guilty of it as well sometimes.
Yeah, and we live in the age of autocorrect and things like that too, but it is actually a great sign that they're analyzing the words properly and then decoding them properly. And then beyond,
so that's really good to hear when we have our kids making spelling mistakes, and really it's not a bad thing, which I think I need to hear, but I want people to sort of really focus on as well, realizing that spelling or misspelling is not necessarily a bad thing. It's really the way things are broken down. And just as you're talking here, I'm even thinking personally that forget about my own issues that I had spelling, and maybe I sometimes still have with spelling, but I found it something to be I don't like to really be emphasizing when it comes to homework at night, just because of the so many other things that are important to do, and spelling, and like you said, because of autocorrect, I'm like, okay, maybe that's one of those things that my kids can sort of take. I could be a little more lax with them so that they can focus on other things, and they're going to be using a computer anyway for the most of their life, and not going to be using a traditional pen and paper. So what's the point of me sort of correcting them? But you're saying there is a certain, I guess you could say, part to this job of ours as parents that we should be correcting them, but at the same time, I think it's something that balance could be very tricky.
It is. So there's two things that come to mind. First of all, this doesn't only stop with spelling. What you're seeing with the spelling, you're seeing is how their brain is working, and that they're applying some of the knowledge that they already have to words that they might not know about. And that's great, because then you can see what it is that they're struggling with. There's a couple programs that we work with, for spelling specifically, that I love. And it helps kind of pinpoint exactly what kind of words they're struggling with. And then we kind of start there and then move on, right? And then the other thing is that you're absolutely right in not honing in on it at night with homework to a certain point, because sometimes you just want them to get their words down on paper without the fear or the blockage of saying like, oh, I didn't spell that right, or something along those lines, right? And then this goes the same for grammar. Up to a certain age, whenever you see them like over correcting something, like if you hear a 6-year-old say, I run to the store, that's great, because they're applying the natural rule to an irregular verb, and you see that transferring over, and you don't want to be like, you mean ran, right? And you don't want to necessarily correct them. You want to say it back to them properly. Be like, oh, you ran to the store? That sounds great. And that's the way that you're going to correct it, so that they don't continue to make that mistake beyond the time where it's like an acceptable thing to do, right? And
okay, I love that example. I think that's really helpful for us, to sort of, because I think sometimes we find it cute in some way as parents to hear our kids pronounce words a certain way, or certain vernacular when it comes to how they talk, and it's not that about bringing attention to it. If anything, not bringing attention to it, and very, very nonchalantly correcting them in a way where they understand that this is the right word to use.
Right.
Box, and or whatever it is, run and ran. That you're sort of putting out there to be. This is the right way to do it, but it's okay for what you said, which I think is really important. For so many reasons. But I'm just thinking from the mental health, and from the how they feel about themselves, and like, oh, I made a mistake. No, you didn't make a mistake. You're doing it perfect, and
you
this
don't
is the
want
way
to
to do it.
them. Right.
Exactly.
For sure.
Exactly.
With spelling too, eventually when you have them writing, you think about the writing process with the drafts and stuff like that. When they're younger, you say, okay, like let's aim for like a few words, and then you go to like a sentence, and then you go to a short paragraph, right? And when they're drafting it, just say, write down, just like you said you do at night, like have them just write down their thoughts. Don't worry about the spelling. But then when they read it back to themselves, say, can you like put a little squiggly line under some of the words that look wrong to you? Like you're like, I'm pretty sure I misspelled it. So then you're teaching them to like monitor themselves. And then you can help them with some of those words and then you say, okay, let's try again. And then you're teaching them that grit, which is the idea here, right? You're doing it gently. You're working with their developmental level in mind, but you are also addressing the issue and teaching them to do better next time, but without all of that pressure.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much there that we could probably delve more into over here, but there's so many things that I want to cover, and like something that's coming to mind as you're talking about this is as a teacher and as a educator, also with your training, I'm curious the influence that's had on your parenting, and maybe vice versa as well. When the parenting itself and seeing so many different things within what's happening at home, how does that come into play with being a teacher and an educator?
So it's really interesting because I have two kids. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. And I consider them pretty bright. They are just like ahead of the curve type of kids. And it's interesting because my husband and I were actually talking about this last week. When you go to teaching school, if you go through an education program in college, they actually teach you child development lessons, and it starts in the womb, right? They're talking about how the development matters. And so you almost get trained on parenting before you even become a parent because you're just in this program, because it is so important to know what the developmental ages and stages are for kids and to keep that in mind when you're interacting with them. So when they're in, like I said, you start reading to them and you're building that connection and a bond with them. It's not so much about teaching them how to read. You're teaching them to enjoy the process and to like enjoy hanging out with you and to associate it with something positive. And then when it comes to like disciplining or whatever, you have to realize at what point something may not be developmentally appropriate for your kid to know or to do at that point in life. Like, it's hard to discipline a 2-year-old because a 2-year-old is not necessarily conscious of all of the things that they're doing. So you keep that in mind, and then you kind of redirect them, and then you kind of work with that. I might be getting off topic here, but and then I had taught for many years before I had children, and I was kind of taking notes of like parents who I felt were doing it well and parents who I felt were not doing it so well. And I would piecemeal it and be like, when I have kids, I'm going to X, Y, and Z, and this is what I'm going to do with their schooling. Knowing your kid as an individual is a big deal. So my 2 kids are 2 different people. And the way that we address my son's education is a little bit different than the way we address my daughter's education. My son has a photographic memory. He has been reading since 2-ish, right? Like, and we didn't teach him like explicitly. We just kept reading with him, and it clicked. And then anytime he comes across a word he doesn't know, he only has to figure it out one time, and then he will like bank it. He just has it in his mind. And my daughter, kind of similar. It clicked at 4 for her instead of 2. But like, if you notice their spelling skills, it's very different. Like, my daughter and my son also go to a Montessori type school. Part of the time we do a hybrid setup. I do partially homeschool and then partially Montessori because of their different learning styles. I tried to keep that in mind when we decided what to do with their education. And at the Montessori school, my daughter is in a higher spelling list than my son is, and she's 2 years behind. Like, the way he's encoding his words is a little bit different. And so we are like, okay, he's like a brilliant reader and a brilliant mathematician, but his spelling is a little bit atrocious. So we're going to have to work on this, and that's okay. And then with her, she's moving a little bit more developmentally appropriately, I guess. She's like a year or 2 ahead of where she's supposed to be, but it's not the same. Like, the math concepts aren't clicking the same, and she's not taking off with it the same way that he is. So they just have different skills, and then we try to just build upon their needs based on their strengths. And that's the biggest thing that I've taken from teaching into my parenting is that you want to use their strengths to build their needs. You don't want to make them feel terrible about not knowing how to do something. You want to allow them to make the mistakes in a safe space and know you have to make mistakes to learn, and that it's okay to fail, and that it's okay to do things like that. And that's an interesting journey.
Yeah, there really is, and I'm sure there's a lot there that you could have like a notebook full of different things of like, oh, I don't want to do that, I want to do this. Ooh, that was a good idea. I want to sort of take that and bring that over here. You were talking about before the hybrid approach. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that regarding what that's like, and for a parent that is looking into having some sort of hybrid approach regarding their kids' education, how they would go about doing that and bringing it up to the school system and having that collaborative approach, which can be very difficult within the school systems.
We're very fortunate to be in the situation that we're in, and I think it varies from state to state. So our homeschooling journey is through a charter school where we are held accountable. Like, we have a credentialed teacher that oversees our homeschooling journey, and we have to turn in work to her and touch base with her every week. And we get stipend money to buy the curriculum that they need through the charter. And the way that the charter that they're going through is they can choose what curriculum that they can have. There are other homeschooling programs that prescribe a curriculum to you, and then they go through it step by step. And okay, day one, you're doing this in language arts, this in math, this in science, this in English. And I'm not personally that person. I like more of a project-based or natural approach to their learning. And it's a mixture. Like, I do see a lot of value in the traditional approach, and we do use that for some things, right? Because there's no escaping it, in my opinion. Like, you have to put pencil to paper to do a math problem a lot of the time, right? When you start off by representation a different way, but then you have to take a pencil to paper at some point, right? There's no escaping that part. But then we want to make it like a realistic comparison to it. So we like piecemealing our things. Other states, I believe you might have to just homeschool on your own, in which case I would say where you're not getting support from a credentialed teacher or from an institution that's helping you go along. And in those cases, I encourage those families to find what would be called like homeschooling pods or other like-minded parents to just collaborate with, so that you can ease your workload. Just make sure your village is strong whenever you're trying to do this approach. Because even though I'm a trained credentialed teacher, at some point my kids are going to need other people to listen to, and it's not just me. And truthfully, at some point they're going to outsmart me. They're going to need other stuff, and we're going to have to outsource. And so homeschooling is kind of our journey for right now, but it might not be our journey forever. It just depends on where they are developmentally. And then I noticed that they needed that social aspect a little bit more, in which case we're treating this Montessori school kind of as an enrichment and reinforcement of the things that they're learning at home as well. And so they just go part-time to that, and that's just separate. And they're getting, in my opinion, the best of both worlds. They're getting an education that's geared towards their ability level and not their age. It's just wherever they are. And they are also getting that individualized help, and they are also getting that socialization that they need.
Well, it's amazing. I feel like if every single child in America can get something like that, we would have a changed educational system.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, well,
it's so hard.
Good luck with that. But that being said, I think there's something that really stood out to me for just talking about is a parent realizing at a certain point that, you know what, as much as I want to keep them within this little safe cocoon over here, I also realized I have to let them go. Can you talk a little bit about that and what parents can do to prepare themselves for whenever that age happens? And it could be for different types of social situations differently, from being a 4 or 5-year-old and maybe going to like a nursery or a play group to entering into grade school or into high school where they need less of you, but you also love them the same amount, if not more. So how can a parent go about creating a very healthy severance package for their children?
Yeah, I love the way that you worded that. I mean, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to know what is working to your child's advantage and what is working to their disadvantage, and to see if you're playing a part in the things that are working to a disadvantage. So we initially got into homeschooling because my son was going into kindergarten in the pandemic, right? So we were like, well, I'm not going to have them hop on Zoom. That's ridiculous. So, because homeschooling wasn't part of our plan to begin with. But then I realized that it was working for us because he could move at his own pace. I could order things that were above his grade level because that's how he was functioning. Like a kid, like I said, brilliant.
It was working for him.
It was working for him. But then I want to say last year, while he was in first grade, I was noticing some signs of him interacting with his sister in kind of a weird way, where I was like, she's the type of person that will try to please him and just, be like, okay, fine, you get it your way and it's okay. And I'm like, no. He can't just get it his way every time. He needs to know that that kind of behavior is not okay. And even though I keep telling him that, it's not really clicking. He needs a peer to kind of, work through some of these social issues that I was noticing. And I'm like, I think I need to put him in school for a little bit. And I don't know how I want to put him in school for a little bit. So let's try this hybrid setup and see how that's going to work. And that's been working well because now he is getting those lessons that I cannot duplicate at home. And you have to realize what you can do at home and what has to be outsourced. And I think, and so even though my kids are young, I work with preteens and things like that. They're supposed to release. They're supposed to, my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they're supposed to be seeking their friendships more at some point than they are seeking that connection with you as a parent, and to not take that so personally whenever that time comes. And it's a bummer because they're not that sweet, cuddly baby anymore. They are growing up and they're meant to be independent at some point. And so you're just meant to be that safety net when they have flown the nest. But the thing about the homeschool community, I do want to speak to it, is that there are so many ways to approach it, even as they get older. So if you're like, I think my kid needs to still be homeschooled through high school, that's fine. There are so many ways that you can still get that social aspect or help that they need and things like that. Like if they go through, you can go to a community college and get dual credit for high school and college classes and stuff like that through a homeschool program. And then graduate with your AA and your high school diploma, and you were still sitting in a classroom and you know how to work with your workload. Of course, that has to be appropriate for the kid to know how to deal with a college workload. But some kids are ready for stuff like that, or they can do online classes and then just spend a lot of their other time doing community projects like volunteering and things like that, where they have to get out into the community. The only thing that I would caution parents from doing is keeping them home 100% of the time. But I would argue that most homeschool parents don't do that. They find ways to get them out of the house.
And then there's the whole sports world as well, of getting them involved in community sports and like local sports or even state-run programs. I think that could be very helpful as well. And I'm so glad you touched on that, because I think the concept of the social aspect is just as important, if not in certain ages, more important than the parent dynamics and relationship. And I know this is talked about as there's a book by Judith Harris, The Nurture Assumption, where she talks about the power, and she makes the argument for the social interactions are more important for a child's development than a parent's interactions and relationship. I personally like to think that the parent role is a more important role, but it's probably a discussion we can have for a very long time, because I think they play very, very different roles. And it's not necessarily about one being better than the other. The way I like talking about it, at least, having worked in a school as a therapist a long time ago, and I learned this from a mentor of mine, was she said, like, every child has a triangle. And in the triangle you have school, you have the other corner is family, the other corner is community. And every child needs to feel the 4 S's, which is safe, seen, soothed, and secure, in at least one of those S's. So sometimes the home situation may not be the best situation. So let it be the school situation, and they have a support system and a staff and the social life that could give them those 4 S's. And sometimes it could be community, whether it's a Boys and Girls Club, a Y, or something else that are more locally. But it's important for a child to have at least one of those corners to have those 4 S's. So I think that's what you're talking about, is as a parent knowing what that balance is.
Yes,
of
100%.
And how to go about doing it in a way that's best for that child. But I want to focus on you and how you seeing what your son was, how he was interacting with his sister, and then you looking at that and saying, okay, he needs more than this. Can you talk a little bit about that experience within you personally, and what was that like to be in that situation, yet in a very subjective point of view with your own child, which is hard to be subjective with your own child, and taking yourself back and saying, okay, I need to make a decision that's best for him, even though mommy would love to have him here and he needs more. But what was it like for you, and how can a parent make sure that they're being as lovingly subjective as possible with their children regarding their scholastic both capabilities but also future endeavors in whatever system is best for that child?
Yeah. Well, for me personally, I've seen the long game. Like, my first class I ever taught were first graders, and these kids are 22 years old now. And, and so I've seen them at the age that my son was, right? When I started toying with the idea, like, I might need to get them to where they are now. Like, I've seen them progress. We keep in touch because I'm just like that person with them, and they're my babies. They will always be my babies, even though like we can go grab a beer together at this point, right? And then I'm looking at my kids, and I know what the long game is. The goal is for me to become obsolete at some point. And
you say that with love. It's not like you're saying that,
and it hurts me because
we're not throwing a party, but when they leave.
Yeah, it's being realistic, because I need my kids to be able to function in the world without me there coaching them the whole time, but there as a safety net, and also there as a cheerleader, and to just kind of give them the tools from the sidelines when necessary. And there are times where I have to swoop in and save them. They are still there. And there are times that is 100% necessary. But then there are other times where I need to allow them to fail or go through those hardships so that they learn those lessons. So you mentioned the socialization aspect and how important that is. I've had this conversation over and over again with my kids, where you can be as smart as anybody in the world. Like, you could be the smartest person in the room. If you don't know how to work with and collaborate with your peers, it's going to fall flat. You're not going to get a job. You're not going to get like
a partner.
You're going to a partner. Yeah, it's going to be really, really hard to navigate this life outside of just academics. And so we try to really emphasize the importance of both and give them the opportunities for those skills to be honed. Like, I had them in baseball last year in the fall, and they'll be in it again in the spring, and that helped a lot with as far as like having structure and rules and people depending on you to pull your part when the ball's coming your way. It, like, you had to have a sense of urgency, and these are things that I noticed that my kids were lacking. They would, for example, drop something on the floor and then not pick it up, and I'm like, but didn't
I don't think there's any parent that could relate to that.
The floor. Yeah. Like, so then in baseball, if the baseball fell right by their feet, you better pick it up and like right away. So otherwise you're gonna have 8 other people yelling at you. And it's just, but it's like, in my mind, it was a real life comparison. Like, you are building these skills in kind of a fun and safe way, but those skills should translate into their other aspects of their lives as they continue to grow and to evolve.
That's awesome. I think there's so many more things we could sort of talk about in this area, and obviously regarding the homeschooling stuff. But I want to switch gears over here and talk about humor and the play of humor that it has both in the classroom and within parenting. And I'm curious from your point of view and seeing humor in so many different forms. What can parents do to maybe implement more, or maybe some guidance regarding parents when it comes to having a deep, meaningful conversation, whatever that means, whatever situation they're in, but yet also throwing in humor to sort of break the ice and bring in the person that they're talking to a little bit more.
I love that you bring that up, because I think my particular style revolves a lot around humor, and in the classroom with my colleagues and with my children, but there's a time and a place for it, right? And so it does provide levity, and it alleviates a lot of the pressure of some situations, right? But it can still drive a point home. But to not overuse it to the point where people aren't taking you seriously. And because I've noticed in my own journey, this is not necessarily with parent or with my kids so much as it is. Oh no, I mean, I guess it could go with my kids too. If I use humor in a time where I'm trying to make a point, like I need you to learn from this specific situation, and I'm like, and we can't be all. I say something that makes them laugh. It can lose a little bit of its gravitas. Like it has to be used in the right way and sparingly in those situations. And then it guides a lot of our time together when we are not in a sit down, we need to talk type of scenario. It's kind of, it's to help build rapport. It's to help build comfort. It's to help build that relationship between us so that they know that I can level with them wherever they're at and connect with them wherever they're at. And just provide that other facet of my personality with them.
I love that. And I think most of parenting and I think a lot of relationships we have in life is about creating that balance and knowing how to have the proper recipe for what that situation is. And I like the way you're saying it of knowing that it's a very important and vital part of the relationship. And also there are many times where it's not apropos and not the thing to be using. And I think knowing that, I think is really, really important. When it comes to, obviously today we're in the, I guess what's known as the digital age. But at the same time, many of us parents are in places where we would love our kids to be more into books and reading, a lot more physical than there is digital. And I'm curious, what your thoughts are. And because I don't think the digital world is a bad world. I think it can be very, very helpful. But at the same time, creating a environment where they can read ink that's on paper instead of reading a digital background. What your thoughts are and how parents can go about creating more of that physical book reading in the world within their homes.
How long you got? I got lots of thoughts on this. So, 100%. You've heard me say over and over again, just in the last few minutes, how important it is to read the books and have that physical book in front of them, analyzing those pictures, sitting with them, building that rapport, that communication, that relationship with your kiddo and with the books. Now, utilize your local library. There's so many things that they offer that are beyond just books. It can offer camaraderie, it can offer different programs or activities and things like that where you can get them interacting with text in different ways. Also realize that text is not always just books. It can be magazines, it can be graphic novels, which are also, a form of book, but it could be articles that you read together, and things like that. For Christmas, truthfully, I got both of my kids a Kindle because I wanted them to be able to read more on the go without stuffing their bag with like 5 or 6 books. And this was just easier. So we were out of town for the last few days and they had their Kindle and they were they were sitting on the couch with my sister-in-law and everybody was just reading a book and that's what they were doing. And that it's modeled for them That's a big thing. Like, you as the adult should be modeling it as well. Start reading a little bit more, even if it is, again, a magazine or something. Because if you are modeling that you are in front of the phone or in front of the computer a lot of the time, I know it's inescapable with the way that work works lately, right? Like, we have to do a lot of work on the computer, but to make that conscious effort that when I have downtime or free time and I'm not physically working, I'm not just scrolling social media reels all the time. That's fine, in moderation, but you want to model the moderation. You want to model reading, you want to model enjoying text, and they will oftentimes follow suit. They want to do things like you, and you want to model this from day one again. And there's that. The other thing is, I know I've mentioned it a little bit before, but I approach things in a project-based way. And so to provide meaning to the things that they are learning and researching and things like that. So then you use the digital tools as a tool. You teach them how to work with it within the confines of what you're asking them to do. Are you asking them to research something, look something up? Are they looking at pictures of something? Are they creating some sort of PowerPoint? What is the end product going to be? So how do you responsibly use these tools? And then you teach them how to navigate them without demonizing the thing. The thing is going to be here throughout their entire life and much more evolved than it is right now. So it would be doing them a disservice to completely get it out of their lives. You need to teach them how to interact with it responsibly. That's my point.
For sure. And I know there's so much more here that, that we can probably just have a interview just on this topic alone regarding that. And I think that the modeling is probably the most important thing. And, as you're talking, I'm like picturing myself like, all right, maybe I should be talking to my wife about getting some sort of box that our phones go into from when the kids get home and, until about 7, 8 o'clock, where there's no phone whatsoever around. So it's the kids realizing that, like, okay, so, mom and dad are here. And that's maybe something that I'll bring up with my wife after.
I need to do that too.
Later on today. I think it'd be really, it's really hard. And I think the first step is for us to acknowledge that this is hard and that it's not something that just kids are struggling with regarding picking up a book, but sometimes mom and dad are also struggling with it, because we would much rather watch another social media post or listen to a podcast, because sometimes it's a lot easier. But there is something to be said regarding actual physical book and reading, or the physical as in the Kindle as well, and reading, just because of what it can mean for the person individually and developmentally as well. So I want to switch gears here just a little bit, because I want to go back to that homeschooling aspect of things. And as we sort of, and I feel like we're going to have another conversation, you and I, because we're getting towards the end over here, but there's one more thing I really want to talk about over here for parents that are homeschooling, in your experience, both personally and professionally. If you had to pinpoint one or two things that you see parents that are in this situation not doing the way they should, what would be the one or two main pointers that you would say to parents regarding their journey, either that they're on that's not going so well, or their journey that they're about to start and they're contemplating in the homeschooling world of education?
Yeah, it's hard.
Okay. Enough said. Thank you. Okay.
It's hard. Maybe don't do it. And maybe do it. I don't know. It depends what's right for you. It's interesting because I see all of these polarizing posts that are like, get your child out of the system. They're being inundated with blah, blah, blah. Like, you must homeschool to break them free. And it's like, well, no, that's not necessarily right for everybody. And then there are other posts that are like, homeschoolers are weird. You're like, no, that's not necessarily true either, right? Like, you have to do what's right for you and your family and your kids. So if you're thinking about going into the homeschool world, look to see if your state or your district or your area offers a program that helps guide you. I believe one that is nationwide is called the K-12 program, and they will ship materials to your house and you get a prescribed curriculum and you do it day by day. So one of the mistakes that I saw, I told you, I worked with homeschool families for about 6 years of my career. And I was that credentialed teacher that was overseeing a roster of families and children, and then seeing what they were going through. Some families need that prescribed curriculum in the beginning, to just show them, okay, this is how we're going to structure our day. We need to have some sort of rhyme and reason to what we're doing, when we're doing it, and to know when to back off. Your homeschooling day is not the same length as a traditional school day. It does not have to last from 8 to 3. You have to realize you have to break away from that thought a little bit. Still provide structure, but also know that when it comes to doing the work, it is not 7 hours of paperwork that you are asking your child to do. That is mind numbing. And you're going to get them to hate school really, really quick. And you don't want them to necessarily do that. So you have to keep in mind, there are like things online I have to see, like for kindergarten kids, you're only doing like about an hour and a half of actual sit down work, and you can split it up throughout the day. Keep their ages in mind, their developmental level in mind. Their age is their attention span in minutes. If they are 5, they have a 5-minute attention span. This means that after 5 minutes, you might want to have them just stretch a little bit and sit back down, or take a sip of water and sit back down, or go to the bathroom and sit back down. They just need to reset. This caps
structured breaks.
Years old, right? Yeah. And then as you get more comfortable with it and you're like, no, I don't want to prescribe curriculum, I want to do my own thing, that's great. Just make sure that you know what you're doing so that you're providing that consistency for your kids, because your kids are going to seek structure. However you want to do it is up to you, but they will seek structure. And if you have holes in your plan, they will find them. And then you need to make sure that you stay consistent. And that's the other thing, is just
consistency is key
part of it. If you notice that you are struggling with that part, which I know that a lot of families do, get yourself involved in those homeschool communities or those pods, or with like-minded families in your area. Make sure you have that village that helps either alleviate your workload or help you through whatever hardships you're having in your journey, because it's different for everyone.
Yeah, and I would say, just to add to that, I couldn't have said it better myself, even though this is not my field of expertise. But I think one more thing I would like to add to that is to make sure that the relationship with your child doesn't falter based on the relationship that you have with your child as being their quote unquote teacher / principal. Yeah. And you want to be able to have the relationship grow and not deteriorate. And if you see that becoming an issue and kids are not able to separate, or parents are not able to separate, then maybe it's time to speak to a specialist or speak to someone that can really guide you for what the right type of situation is, or maybe even a family friend or a relative that can really give you the guidance and tell you the truth. And sometimes the truth can be hard to hear, but if there is a relationship change that's happening with your children based on your idea of, I always wanted to homeschool my kids, and it may not be the best environment for them. So know what the best environment is for them in order for this to be us creating, like we were talking about earlier, is creating the best individuals so that they don't need us and they're able to go out of the cocoon in the healthiest way possible. And it's a lifelong endeavor, and we're for sure going to have to follow up on this because there's so many more things. And I think I got to about half my questions over here that I had written down for where we are. But I like ending over here on a few rapid fire questions over here. And I got an interesting one for you over here. In the enchanted land of parenting, where there might be a mythical creature of some sorts that would make an amazing teacher's assistant. What would assist a frazzled parent or homeschooling adventure, or in the classroom itself?
That's a good question. Let me think about that. I would say my gut instinct, and maybe I'll think back on this and go like, no, that wasn't right, is just to have kind of a bunch of materials that they can choose from to busy themselves with or to reset themselves with. So sometimes it could be, I don't know why Play-Doh's coming to mind, or something along those lines where they can busy their hands, they can busy their minds, they can redirect themselves somehow so that they can realign with whatever they need to do to move on to another task, or if you need them to redirect, or if you just need a few minutes to yourself, think of what it is that your kids love to do and have that ready and easily accessible, so that they can not have idle hands. That's the biggest thing. You want to keep their brains and their hands kind of busy, and also provide that opportunity for boredom so that they can be creative. So.
Oh, that's great. And like we said before, the balance is key. Are there any books or videos or maybe people to follow or to find more information on this concept of homeschooling, education, reading that you would recommend to parents to find out more information?
So homeschooling, it is dependent on where you are. But like I said, you can look into something like a prescribed curriculum, like the K-12 program. Go onto Facebook and look into any sort of co-op communities that are in your area to reach out to people in your area that are like-minded and are approaching things the same way, because almost always there's something like that. As far as like professional development books and things like that, for reading stuff, I really like, it's called UFLY. It's the University of Florida's Literacy and Instruction program. A lot of their resources are free, and it approaches a phonics-based instruction in a very regimented way, and it works really well to
That's amazing.
teach your
And
kids how to read.
I love that. And that's something that we will try to post a link for them in our show notes over here. My last question to you over here, Taleen, based on your experience and things that you've had both individually and also as your profession, if you can think of a superpower that you would like to have as a parent that would help out with everyday mundane parenting tasks, what would that superpower be?
Like, have the food cooked. Like, that would be so helpful for me if just the food part of our day was just handled all of the time with nutritious and wholesome meals that were just ready to go.
And that includes the shopping, I'm assuming.
I don't know what that superpower is called, but I want it. Like a personal chef, but not necessarily. Just stocked and ready to go, because these kids eat so much.
And they're only 5 and 7. Wait until they're a little bit older. Good luck with that. And it's beautiful. So that it's really something to look forward to. And as you were saying that answer, that what came to mind for me is from the Jetsons, that robot that really takes care of all the stuff at home.
That's exactly what I was imagining. It's just some robot that's just doing all of that stuff. That would be really helpful.
Well, that sounds like a skill that all of us parents can use. But Taleen, it's been an absolute pleasure and an honor, and I really learned a lot from here. And can you share a little bit about what do you have going on right now? If people want to find more information about you, where can they contact you?
Oh, sure. So if you are one of those families that wants to know about all of their options, it's not just the dichotomy of homeschool versus traditional school. There's a lot of options out there, and you want to talk about it, or there's consulting that you want to do. I have a website, wildk5.com, WILDK5.com. And that stands for What I Learn Daily. But anyway, and then I also have an Instagram at the same page, wildk5, a TikTok, and I'm building my LinkedIn and my Pinterest. But Instagram and TikTok are the easiest ways to do that, or the website. It'll just email me whenever you are interested. And then if you want just resources to help guide your journey, I've been creating resources, and that's also available on the website as well. If you click curriculum, it'll take you to my teacher store, and then you can buy stuff there.
That's awesome. Okay. Thank you
and then
so
my
much
podcast, The Learning Curve.
Oh, yes.
So The Learning Curve Education Conversations is on Apple, on all your streaming platforms, Apple, Spotify, Google Play, all that stuff.
Awesome.
So,
and I would recommend the podcast. I've been both a guest and a listener in the past, so I would highly recommend this for everyone. But Taleen, thank you so much for joining us today. I learned so much, and I hope we get a chance to do this again soon.
Me too. Thanks for.
Hey again. I hope you were able to learn as much as I did today. Thank you so much for staying to the end and listening to the entire interview. Please feel free to leave a comment wherever you listen to this podcast. All comments will be read weekly, and we appreciate all feedback and ideas. If you have an idea for a guest or a specific topic, please feel free to share. Additionally, you can contact us at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for joining today. And remember, parenting is a journey. Don't forget to enjoy it. The goal is to be a little better today than yesterday, and hopefully better tomorrow than we were today.